Hi everybody, welcome to this new video on how to leverage AI for entrepreneurship. And in this video, I want to focus on how you can use Gen AI for helping you to ideate on value propositions when you're developing a startup idea. Now, you might already have tried to use ChatGPT for ideation, and you might actually have experienced that that's not always that easy to do. And more specifically, you might have experienced two problems. And the first problem is that often when you ask ChatGPT or Claude to ideate for you, you might notice what I would call a lack of customization, meaning it gives you some ideas, but they are not really tailored to your specific situation, your specific preferences. And the second problem is that often if you ask ChatGPT to ideate, it will give you ideas, but they tend to be quite middle of the road ideas that lack real creativity. And of course, when we want to develop a startup, we want to create something unique. So creativity is very important. So what I want to do in this video is to show you how we can solve these particular problems. And to do so, we will first of all talk about context engineering, and I will show you how we can build a project that will allow us to engage in much more customized ideation. And second, I will show you how we can build a skill in ChatGPT that will allow us to engage in much more radical ideation. So these are the two things that I want to illustrate in this video. So let's get started. So in this video, I want to show you how you can build projects in ChatGPT. And to briefly understand why it's actually important to build projects, let me briefly explain the distinction between prompt engineering and context engineering. And I try to visualize it here on the slide. So prompt engineering means you write an extensive prompt that you give as input to ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT will use that for output. Now, if you just do prompt engineering, meaning you just write a prompt, you have to see it that you kind of enter an empty room, and the only info that ChatGPT will have is this prompt. And based on that, it will give you an output. Now, when we talk about context engineering, that actually means something different. So in prompt engineering, we will actually decorate our room. So we will create a project. We will give that project a memory, instructions, and knowledge sources. And then every time when we enter that project, the ChatGPT will have a lot of context about you, and it will be able to leverage that context to give you a more specific answer to your prompt. So in that way, we will not just write a prompt, but we will also give it a lot of context that can help it to provide much more customized output. So let me briefly explain how you can build up a project with memory, instructions, and knowledge sources. Yes, so I'm now in my ChatGPT account, and if we want to create a new project, we simply have to go here to the left side and scroll down a bit, and then you will see projects. And then I can just press on this plus sign to create a new project. So now we can call it something like value proposition creator. And the first important thing is here to go to memory, and I would encourage you to use project-only memory, because then ChatGPT will keep a specific memory for that project. So every time when you prompt in that project, it will keep a memory about it. So it will kind of remember what you did in the past, and that already can give some valuable context. And then we can click on Create Project. So then our project will be created. And now, of course, this room is still empty. So now we have to start decorating it. And we can kind of give two types of decoration. So one is here, if you go to sources, we can actually simply upload knowledge files that ChatGPT will see every time when you enter that room. And I will later on give you an example. But another thing we can do is here to go to these 3 points, go to project settings, and then here we can add instructions. And here we can actually describe how the agent in this project should behave. So here we can kind of stipulate the behavior of ChatGPT in this particular project. And now, of course, I could simply here start typing some instructions, but I think the more efficient way is to actually leverage ChatGPT to help you in writing instructions. And let me briefly show how you can do that. Yes, so now we can simply here start chatting. And so I already prepared a prompt for you that can help you to create instructions. Yeah, so this is the prompt where I actually ask it to check for best practices on how to create instructions for a project in ChatGPT, and subsequently apply these best practices to create instructions for an agent that can help me in ideating about value propositions. And I want to keep these instructions rather concise because there are some limits. So I'm saying it should be maximum 5,000 characters. So now I can simply execute this prompt, and then we already will receive some instructions that we then can copy paste into our settings. Yes, and so now I've received output. So indeed, it went to search for some kind of best practices on how to write instructions. And then here I actually receive the instructions. So I describe the role, core approach, output style, ideation rules, already quite some information. Of course, we can now also further fine-tune this, but now just in terms of making it efficient, I will simply copy this and then I can go back to my instructions. And so here I go now back to value proposition creator. I start a new chat, and then here I can go to the 3 points, go to project settings, and now I can paste in here my instructions. And in that way, I have created my instructions. And now I have actually, as a knowledge source, created a deep research report about best practices in how to engage in creating value propositions. So that's a deep research report that I will actually add here as an additional source, so that it has some additional background information on how to create value propositions. Of course, you can freely decide what kind of information you want to add here. So I will go here to sources. I will click on add sources. I will upload my file. Yes, and so here is my deep research report in creating high quality value propositions. So this is now the one that I will add. Yes, so now my PDF has been added as a knowledge source, and now I actually already decorated my room. Yeah, so I have some instructions, I have some knowledge sources. So now I can already start using my project for ideation. So let me show you an example. Yes, so I already prepared now a prompt where I ask it to create for me a value proposition that can solve the following problem. People struggle to pay their energy bills. Take a look at the attached report on this problem and use the input as starting point to ideate on a value proposition. And I actually, again, I have created a deep research report on this problem. So I did a deep research on why, when, and how do people struggle with paying energy bills. And so that file I will now attach here to this particular prompt. Yeah, so you see I've now attached this report to the prompt. Yeah, so not to the project. So this is not a knowledge source for the project. This is just now information that I added to this particular prompt. And now I can start executing. And so now in this project, it can see all the contexts, and of course it can see the prompt and the file that are attached to the prompt, and based on that, it will give me an answer. Yes, and here we can see the first suggestions that it now generated for me. So the first suggestion is an energy safety net that I could create as a startup. Another value proposition, energy as a weekly budget. And here an affordability autopilot. Yeah, so you see that now it's able to create quite tailored value propositions. However, I would say that these suggestions are not extremely creative. They're more kind of middle of the road suggestions. So if we now want to have more kind of creative solutions, we still need to take one more step. And that step involves what we call skill building. Yeah, so what do we mean with skills? So skills are kind of specific capabilities that we can create. And every time that ChatGPT thinks that that skill is relevant, it can enable that skill. And so in the end, and I will also show you that, skills are a kind of text document describing a certain activity. And then every time when ChatGPT thinks that activity is relevant, it will enable it. So in that way, you can see them as additional things that we can add to our. And let me now show you how you can easily build skills in ChatGPT. Yeah, so if you want to build skills in ChatGPT nowadays, you have to go here to plugins. And then you have to click here on skills. And then you can press here on this plus sign and create with chat. And then you can actually simply create a skill by describing what kind of skill you want. And so in this case, we want to create a skill that can help us in engaging in radical innovation, radical creativity. Yes, and so I here simply now build a skill for me that can act as a radical innovator, which is very good in creating radically new ideas. The skill should act as a maverick that is pleased to think about outside of the box and comes up with ideas that are really at the edge of what is possible. So this is kind of a description of the skill that I want. And then I can press enter, and then ChatGPT will start creating for me this skill, which I can then install. So then you can simply click on install. Now I already did that. So if I now go to my plugins and I go to my skills, we should be able to see here in the list my crazy ideator. Yes, and indeed here we see my crazy ideator skill. And so if I click on that, you will see that in the end, this crazy ideator is simply a description of a capability. So it has a name, it has a short description, and then a longer description about what this crazy ideator should do. And in this case, this will describe how it should really engage in extreme creativity. And so now the skill is created. So now I'm back into my project where we had some first value propositions created. And now as a follow-up prompt, I can simply say use the, and now I can use the @ sign and type in crazy. And then you see it already finds your skill. So then I can click on this and I can say use the crazy ideator to identify additional value propositions. And now we can see whether it will be able to come up with more crazy ideas that are more creative. Yes, so let us now take a look, and you see it now actually said, okay, I've created some wild ideas such as the energy bankruptcy firewall, pay for warmth, not energy, and the energy universal basic service. So you see that now indeed it has been able to create more radical ideas, maybe even already a bit too radical, but then at least you get some inspiration on how to push forward your ideas. Yeah, so this was what I wanted to show you, how you can actually today with projects and skills can really engage in more interesting, customized and more creative ideation. Yeah, so I hope this can be helpful to start ideating on your own startup ideas. So thanks for your attention. Bye.